because the way you understand this 1,000-year reign of Christ, which is what millennium means 1,000 years, the way you understand the 1,000-year reign of Christ really describes how you look at the whole interpretation of apocalyptic literature. And there are 3, maybe 4 main camps here. The first way you can look at the millennial reign of Christ is you talk about a post-millennium. Post-millennialists believe that there will be a 1,000-year reign of Christ, and Christ will come at the end. So what they actually believe is the world is progressing and getting better and better and better and better, and it's going to be it will get so good that we're going to live in this time of the millennium. And it'll be just like this world peace and prosperity that will go for 1,000 years, and we're going to just be so good. Then at the end of it, Christ will come and fully inaugurate His kingdom, and that's where we are. Postmillennialists are pretty rare today. Aren't many around. But in 1904 or 1914, they were all over the place. The 1904 World's Fair here in St. Louis, the postmillennialists were all over. Everybody was all gung-ho. The world's getting better and better and better. The scientific method, all the discoveries, the Industrial Revolution, and things were just going gangbusters. The missionary zeal, they were sending missionaries all around the world. Things were just going, the sky was the limit. Man was just going to do it. And postmillennial fervor was thick. And I would argue that the World's Fair here in St. Louis is kind of the pinnacle of that. It's the celebration of mankind's ability to do whatever he wants to do to put his mind to it. And we're getting better and better. And this was all the rage. It fell in hard times. What made postmillennials have a tough time? Depression. The Depression didn't help, but even before that, World War I kind of put a downer on it. Depression went even further, and World War II pretty much finished it off. And there aren't many postmillennials around anymore. There are a few running around. Nowadays we call them liberals. But you know, the world, man will solve it. We're going to make the world a better place. But it's kind of that silly utopian view. That's postmillennialism.
So they would say that the world's getting better, 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 and it's going to reach this point where it's so great, and that greatness is going to last for 1,000.
That's right. That's right. The brotherhood of man kind of thing. We'll all just get along. The other side of this is the premillennial view. And a premillennialist believes that there is this 1,000-year reign of Christ, but Christ comes up front. Before the millennium, Christ comes, establishes this 1,000-year reign, and He's going to sit in Jerusalem on a throne and rule the world for 1,000 years. And then at the end of it, because this is what Revelation talks about in Daniel, Satan will rise up and fight against him. There will be this big battle, and then finally the end will come. Now, there are problems with this. The biggest problem with this is it grows out of a literalistic reading of Scripture, which is not appropriate with apocalyptic literature. And the other problem with this is it violates what Jesus said. My kingdom is not of this world. And to expect Jesus to come back and set up a throne and sit on a throne in Jerusalem for 1,000 years is really violating the whole scriptural principle of what God's really trying to accomplish. It also reflects a little bit of vindictiveness, which is a common theme among a lot of premillennialists. They can't wait to kind of get their own and a little payback time against all those people who have made it hard for Christians. And they're looking forward to that. And so you have that sense of kind of vindictiveness, because who gets to rule with Christ? Well, Christ's people, and they're looking forward to that millennial time. All the other goofy stuff like rapture and tribulation all get tied into this, and there are varieties of this too. Some people believe that the rapture will come before, some people in the middle, and there's the tribulation, and it gets rather convoluted. And if you want to read it, just go home and read LaHaye's novels, and you can see it all being played out. A version of premillennialists, which we have to deal with here in this country, are known as the dispensational premillennialists. And a dispensational premillennialist takes most of his teachings from a guy named Darby, who wrote a Bible called the Schofield Reference Bible. And it's a King James version with all these nice references to it. And it teaches people how to be a dispensationalist. A dispensationalist is one who believes that God works different ways at different times. And dispensationalists believe that there are 7 dispensations or periods, and God works in different ways in different times. He had one way with Adam and Eve, another way with the people of Israel, another way with the other time periods, and then with us Christians, another final way. So it's like God works this way, this time, now this way. Sometimes it's by grace, sometimes it's by law. And that's why we get real problems with dispensationalists, because we say, no, God's consistent all the way through. He doesn't work change the rules halfway through. So we have problems with the dispensationalists. Then there's another category, and that is known as the amillennialists or the amillennialists. And amillennialists believe that there will not be a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, that the 1,000-year reign of Christ is a picture of Christ's eternal reign, and that we shouldn't be that caught up in this stuff. Obviously, this is where we fall. The big surprise to most American Christians is most Christians everywhere in the world now and always have been this: amillennialists. Because you listen to Christian radio today, and it seems like everybody and his brother is a pre-trib millennialist. And that's the Christian view. That's simply not true. Roman Catholics don't believe in a millennium. We don't believe in a millennium. Good Presbyterians don't believe in a millennium. It's not part of the Christian faith. It's a kind of an odd sort of a thing, and it's popped up every once in a while. And right now in our country, it's all the rage. But it's an anomaly, and it has not been the mainstream of Christian thinking or thought on this at all. Amillennialism has been. All right? So what do we do in the now, not yet, while we're waiting for Christ to come? We try to figure out what Revelation is saying and when it's going to happen and what's going to happen and when Russia's going to invade Israel and Gog and Magog and all that stuff, right? No. Don't worry about it. What do you do while you're waiting? Do your vocation. Be faithful. Watch for Christ's return, and you watch best by being busy doing what He's given you to do. Do your vocation. Be committed.
Is all this confusion over interpreting Revelations one of the reasons Martin Luther wasn't so fond of Revelation?
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the point of it? And and especially in his day, you had people who were starting to spout out kind of millennial sort of stuff and this rather, fanciful things. You had people like that. They called them enthusiasts, people who were pushing the edge and stuff. And Luther had no use for them, and he saw what they did with Revelation, so that's why he was rather, who needs it? Who needs the grief? And so he had a rather negative view, a dim view of it. He didn't see a lot of value in it. All right. Other questions? The other thing to remember against the premillennialists is that Christ promises His followers what? Sufferings and persecutions and hardship and the cross, not glory. And the very thing a premillennialist is looking for is they want to be in on the glory thing. And that's not the goal. And that's not the promise. We are promised to be conformed to Christ. Remember, Luther said there are three things that make a theologian: oratio, tentatio, and meditatio. Oratio means reading, hearing, studying the Word. Meditatio is thinking about it and contemplating what God would have you do. And tentatio means temptation, trial, difficulty, hard times. That's the mark of the Christian walk, not glory and everything's great. And that's one of the other problems of premillennialists is they have the wrong goal and the wrong motivation. They're trying to cash in on the glory, and that's not what we're about here. All right. Other questions? Okay. Cool. That brings me to the end of my little book here and to the end of Kolb. And so that gives us a few minutes here. And what I like to do is just take questions from the field, anything you're still wondering about or you're not clear on, or anything that needs to be clarified or cleaned up for you a little bit in anticipation of someday maybe taking a test. John?
This concept of the rapture then would be premillennial?
Yeah, that's a big part of premillennialism. The rapture is the idea that we will be caught up out of this world suddenly, and we will no longer be present in this world, so that we will be spared the suffering of the tribulation about to happen, and that we won't have to go through that. And that we'll meet Christ in some kind of secret way. It's a secret rapture. And that's a hallmark of dispensationalism. They argue like crazy among themselves when it's going to happen, whether it happens before the tribulation or in the middle of the tribulation or after the tribulation. And that's where they'll talk about pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. Some will say, I'm a pre-trib, dispensational premillennialist. Well, that's what they're talking about.
Isn't that directly contradictory to what Christ said?
About
Suffering.
Yeah, agreed. I think so.
So it's a major heresy.
Oh yeah, it's a problem. It is a problem. Heresy, I think probably I'd call it that. It's a bad teaching. and it misleads people. See, the biggest problem with most of this premillennial stuff that is just so popular in our culture today, the biggest problem is it makes people get all caught up paying attention to what's happening in the world, what's happening with the prophecies, what's going on with me, and they're thinking about the wrong things. What we should be thinking about is Christ and His forgiveness and simply trusting Him and holding on to His promise. That's what we should be spending our time with. But people get all worked up in all this prophecy stuff, and it misleads them. And I think that's precisely why Satan uses it and why it's so popular. Because Satan uses it quite effectively. It confuses people. It makes them trust the wrong things. All right, good. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I have just one question about baptism again to clarify. Okay. As Lutherans, we believe that you have to have faith before you are baptized in order for the baptism to be effective.
There needs to be faith for the baptism to be beneficial. Not to be effective, but to be beneficial.
Beneficial. So with infants then, are we saying there's faith there before
Absolutely we are. And when does that happen? Sometime in the baptismal action itself, God is giving the faith that actually hangs on to the gift that is given.
And then the baptism occurs.
Yeah, but see, we don't get that. We don't need to play that kind of game. Like, okay, when the pastor says this, faith is given, and now we do the baptism. It's all happening at once. The faith that needs to receive the gift is being imparted even as the faith hangs on to the gift that is being given. It's all happening in that baptismal action. But there is certainly faith there to receive that gift because God gives it. But yeah, you're right. Faith has to be there. But we don't get hung up on at what moment does faith happen and what's the kind of the sequence. That's beyond us. That's God's business.
And we don't just baptize anyone simply because?
Because we want to make sure that there is that faith, and there's also the assurance that they're not just treating this like an ex opere operata, do the deed, magic's done, everything's fixed. Are they really going to be growing in this faith? Is the faith going to be nurtured and cared for? Are they taking seriously what it means to stay in Christ? And we want to have some confidence that that's going to be there as well. So that's why we don't just arbitrarily baptize. Okay? Ted?
I was just, as you were saying that, I was just thinking, like, with an adult, say we, baptize an adult, and kind of what you were saying that we don't know when the faith comes, kind of made me think, what would be our position to say that since the person was elected and God chose them, that the faith has been there since the beginning?
No.
And I figured that's not the, I knew that was wrong, but I didn't know how
God delivers it through the means of grace. He delivers it because they have been elect, but it still has to happen through the means of grace, which is why we still have to proclaim and do the thing. And the faith is not somehow implanted and latently waiting to be discovered.
Okay.
No, God gives it.
I thought along those lines, as we were talking about the thief on the cross, that, we don't know if he was baptized. And,
we would assume he was not.
We would assume he was not. But the faith was still there.
Sure.
And
sure.
the promise was still there.
Faith means clinging to the promise. He was certainly doing that.
Okay, so, we're saying everybody should be baptized as commanded.
Absolutely.
You need to baptize.
That's right. Well, I would say is what happens then is faith is imparted when as soon as the Holy Spirit creates in the individual this trust, this yearning for God's forgiveness, this desire for it. That's faith. Now, if an adult is converted and comes to faith, he has saving faith even before his baptism. And yet, it is the baptism when God is making the claim and giving the name and doing the certainty of it. And so, in a sense, his faith is even before the baptism is even in light of the baptism to come.
Yeah, and that was my point. So,
So even for an adult, it's not like baptism is necessary, is optional or not a big deal. No, it's a big deal.
It's still a big deal.
Absolutely. Because of the claim that's being made and the certainty that comes. John?
When people talk about the thief on the cross, it always seems like we forget that there were two.
Yeah.
And the one ridiculed and mocked Christ, and the other one said, "Stop it, he's innocent, he's not here because of anything he's done."
Right.
And we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the words of salvation were spoken not to the one who mocked Christ, but to the other one.
Well, yeah, that's very clear. Because he says, and the one who rebukes the other one says, "Remember me, and you come into your kingdom," which is the expression of faith, and then Christ gives him the promise. And indeed, you'll have that forgiveness. True. True. All right. Other questions? Okay, I see some of you have the book on in front of you, Veith's book, The Spirituality of the Cross. Commend that book to you. The first 100 pages of it, where he just kind of walks through some of these good themes, law, gospel, and vocation, and the theology of the cross, and what worship is all about. He does a nice job of putting this in very understandable language, very accessible language, and helping to kind of pull some things together of what the Christian faith is all about. I'm less than enthusiastic with his appendix at the end, but you can read that and make your own judgments. He's trying to describe the current state of things in the church, and he's rather in favor of what he calls the confessional guys who are wearing their black shirts with their white collars all the time. And I think he oversimplifies some of the things and doesn't quite get the picture fully right. But that's neither here nor there. I just want to go on record saying I don't endorse everything that's going in the appendix. But I think the rest of the book is pretty strong and has some really good elements in it, and I think you can use it well. Are there any questions? You guys have poked around in Veith's a little bit. Any questions you have, anything in there in that text? All right. For the purposes of this class, you're probably in good shape then at this stage and ready to do the exam, and I think you'll be all right. I would really encourage you to take, if you haven't read Veith yet, go ahead and do that. I think a lot of the things we've talked about here will come much more clear, and you'll be able to see kind of how it all fits together even more, and it will help you as you get ready to launch into your studies here in a few weeks.